Welcome to the Atheist in Recovery podcast, where we talk about finding hope in recovery. And now your host, Dr. Adina Silvestri.
Bonjour, guys, and welcome to episode 63 of the Atheists in Recovery podcast. And today we are talking to Rob Imbo from Ottawa, Canada, and I'm excited for you to learn more about my next guest. On this episode, we get into a lot. We talk about repressed childhood memories. We talk about addiction and pain and masking that pain by using drugs and alcohol and overworking and doing all the things that we do to run from pain. And so Rob has a very interesting story, and he'll talk a little bit about how his life just seemed picture perfect in the beginning. I mean, he was a very successful entrepreneur, so much so that he even met the Queen, which you don't get to say very often. But behind closed doors, there was he was fighting some real demons, and so he talks about what that was like to have to run this very successful company, but not being able to lead, not effectively, and just feeling like he was worthless, even amongst his coworkers that he's known forever. You know, that his coworkers that he hired that were looking to him for leadership, but he couldn't lead. And so he talks a lot about, you know, what worked in recovery, what didn't work in recovery. He gives some great tools throughout his journey, some really good books he'll mention, and I'll link to those in the podcast. And then, of course, his own book, Before I Leave You. And so on to our guest, Rob Imbo. Rob is a successful entrepreneur and the author of the #1 Amazon bestseller, Before I Leave You, a memoir on suicide, addiction, and healing. He is currently a columnist for the Good Men Project and lives in Ottawa, Canada with his wife and 2 daughters. All right, guys, on to the show. Rob Imbo, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
So I wanted to start this conversation with a fun fact that I learned about you, and that is that you met the Queen. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, sure. Very interesting meet. I was a part of a charity event that my business partner founded and I became co-chair of. You may have heard of it now because our now Prime Minister once fought in it. So it was a charity boxing event. And we raised a lot of money. And with those events, the beneficiary was the Cancer Foundation, and the foundation asked if I would be on their board to help with fundraising. And I was pretty young at the time, so they wanted fresh eyes pretty much. So I joined their board, and being on their board had a few advantages, one of which was they wanted to recognize my contribution to the community and invited me to meet the Queen, which was pretty cool. And it's funny because it happened at a weird time in my life because I was kind of sinking, which we'll probably talk about now a little bit. And yeah, it was a weird time for me to meet the Queen and our Prime Minister, our then Prime Minister, Stephen Harper. So just, strange confluence of events.
Yeah, that is so interesting. So there you are meeting the Queen and the Prime Minister at the time. Where was your head? Did you have any like epiphany, like, wow, you know, I've made it, or where were you?
I guess my mind was split into many ways. I worked so hard to get to where I was to achieve some form of monetary success and business success, but I was very unhappy, and I was having a lot of trouble there. So it was just, I know people use the word surreal, but it was surreal. It was definitely, real adjacent. We'll say. Wow. I didn't really know why I was there. Kind of, didn't feel like I was worthy for sure. So yeah, my headspace was kind of weird then, and I described that in my book.
Hmm. Yeah, and we're definitely going to talk more about your book before I leave you. But I'm wondering, before we do that, if you could give us a little bit of background about you and your childhood. And it always interests me to hear about guests' deepest roots. Where they form this identity from their childhood. If you could talk a little bit about that, maybe. Yeah.
Sure. I was born in the South Shore of Montreal, so I'm Canadian. And mom left my father when I was, I think, 18 months or very young anyway. It was an abusive relationship, and mom kind of, I want to say kidnapped, but took off while he was
Mm,
at work, and didn't let him know where, where I was for a little while. So I guess maybe that's the exact definition of it.
maybe.
Uh, but so mom left, but they worked it out that I would go spend. I moved 6 hours away. That I would spend summers and Christmas with him,
Mhm.
and over the years, was pretty much and with the agreement that mom did not actually accept any child support. So we were pretty
Mm,
poor. I think the definition of poor is when if you miss meals, and we definitely miss meals, or we relied on charities and so forth.
mhm.
And that so yeah, living with mom and visiting dad, and I liked visiting dad. So it was good until it wasn't.
Mhm.
And yeah, I just sort of went to school, and something tragic happened, unfortunately, when I was a child that changed my love for school. And
Mm.
so school kind of fell by the wayside. I did somewhat well in high school, but just chose a different path that was pretty truculent throughout my early adult life. And yeah, lived in retail, did all that, and then just sort of clawed my way to going to night school and earning some diplomas, and then getting hired, doing really well, and then starting my own business while taking over my boss, and and starting
Wow.
my own business. And that worked out really well, and it worked. And so started three businesses. Some were marginally successful, and one was pretty good successful, and one was largely successful. So yeah, and I retired in 2017 when I was 45, because we had a daughter who was 6 months old, and I was tired of spending 10 minutes a day with her. So yeah, and then through that, some a few things which I'm sure we'll talk about came to pass.
A few things that came to pass. Yes. Yeah. Let's talk about this Amazon bestseller before I leave you, which actually started as a goodbye letter. And I'm wondering if you could take us through your recovery journey.
Sure. So yeah, that was kind of just giving you a baseline of my
Yeah.
life. And before I get to the darkness, I give a happiness disclaimer, which is something I made up recently, where my life is filled with joy and an abundance of gratitude, and I just sort of live moment to moment. But in the early stages of building what has become a very large company, a memory of being violently raped when I was 8 years old. Something I want to say repressed, something I knew happened, but it came incredibly clear. So it was like a blurry photograph becoming a full length HD movie replaying in my head. And that kind of sent me spiraling. And I decided that I wanted to die. And yeah, I began writing this goodbye letter, trying to explain to everyone why I had decided to end my life. So I had something to leave someone.
Mhm.
Um, and I decided to do it a la leaving Las Vegas. So I just started drinking, and I fell in love with the love drug. I discovered MDMA
Mm.
and speed and cocaine to help me sustain that love. So all the good
Yeah.
things.
Yeah.
Um, and I spiraled to a series of rock bottoms, and then somehow, just sort of turned it around. Decided I had these moments of stepping forward and a lot of falling back, and just sort of finding my way to not wanting to die and to where I am now, where not only do I not want to die, I love every moment of life.
Yeah. Yeah. I wonder if we could take a couple steps back and kind of bring us through when this blurry photo, I believe you said, turned into an HD movie sort of film. When did that, how old were you when that happened?
I was 38, I believe.
Okay.
So, I mean, I attribute it to my success. I was older. I was in a loving relationship, and I had great friends. I had a business. I checked all the boxes of happiness, but I wasn't really happy. And in hindsight, building those businesses and doing that well, I was addicted to work.
Yeah.
And it was just such a blatant addiction. I some such horrible relationships because I didn't give them any investment. I didn't give them any time. I was obsessed with work and obsessed with getting the things and getting the money. And when I had, in a relationship that was positive, even though I was still very much addicted to work, I think the ability to process what had happened kind of I think my body or my psyche said, okay, it's time to look at this, and maybe taking the brakes off of work a little bit forced me to look within, which sucked.
Yes.
Which sucked. Yates says that it takes more bravery to look within than it does to for a soldier to step on the battlefield. And looking into our dark corners is scary as fuck. And I'm going to swear because I know you had Mishko Gabalu on here, and I love him. I know we talked about that one. It scared the shit out of me. Yeah. So yeah, and it was tough. And now I'm still looking within.
It's tough work. And I think that, I see my fair share of individuals with trauma. Actually, I feel like none of us survived childhood without some form of trauma, but I've seen my fair share of individuals with complex PTSD, and it's hard to get them to look within because they have this fear that, if I open this Pandora's box, there's no going back. I'm going to fall apart. I'm going to have a breakdown. And it's really hard to get them to even do a little peek,
It's terrible because you feel that you already, a little piece of you think that believes that you're broken.
Yeah.
And if you acknowledge that, maybe you have to acknowledge that you're broken, which is hugely, hugely frightening. And I know I had it in my mindset that once I acknowledged it, I definitely believed I was broken. And I didn't understand the idea of integration, right? I'm like, okay, how, when I did eventually work up the nerve to seek counseling, I went in with the idea of, eternal sunshine. Can we delete this? I just want to delete this part of my memory. And then so I can move on or quote unquote deal with it, which is not a thing, right? Or I guess to redefine deal with it is how to integrate, those things into who you are.
Yeah.
And now I almost look back, not with fondness, but I like who I am now. I like the father. I like the husband. I like the friend. So I wouldn't change anything. I like, the evolution of me now.
I love it. I love it. So you have this flashback, and you feel like it was because you had some downtime. And where were you when this flashback occurred? Did you reach out to anybody? How did that evolve?
Actually, coincidentally enough, I was reading Christopher Hitchens' God Is Not Great in bed with my wife, and I was reading it, and he was describing a Muslim woman being stoned to death because she had spoken to a man who wasn't her father or brother. And it really upset me. Just like this, how can people be so cruel?
Yeah.
And I was, and it triggered me. And I turned to my wife and like, how could someone be, how could these people be so cruel? And then I said to a little boy, And she said, what? And I said, what? And
Ah,
just then it kind of like the entire memory flushed back at me. Like I just sort of
wow.
just was overwhelmed with this wave of incredibly high definition memory and knowing what happened. Like, because I knew someone was in the room. I knew someone had told me to shut up.
Mm,
I can, and now the smell and the sound and my
mm,
reaction, which was to listen. I didn't make a sound. I cringed. Like the awfulness the next day, like it was all there. And I just ran to the washroom. I was sick and I was catatonic. I didn't speak for I think 48 hours, and just sort of
wow.
my then wife just sort of stood by me and just she didn't. I couldn't vocalize it. I couldn't articulate it, because I don't think there were words for what I was feeling at that point. She just sort
Hmm.
of, kind of let it happen. And I just sort of just, I went within. I just sort of just didn't speak.
Yeah.
I didn't share it with anyone. I shared what little I could with my wife. And I just sort of decided that I don't like it. Just kept repeating and repeating, and I didn't. I wanted that to stop, and it was physically painful.
Mm,
Like I just needed that to stop, which is why I decided, okay, now I have to let her go. I have to let everyone go, and I need to do a bunch of things before I end my life, which is the title of
mm,
the book, right? Get
mhm.
things done before I leave you, and let people know why it makes more sense to die than live. And I wholeheartedly believed in it, and I knew, knew that it was the right thing to do because of what, how I was feeling. I couldn't see the world. The world was different, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, and then it's funny because I turned to just like a week later. I was invited to go to Las Vegas, which I've never been, never wanted to go,
Hmm.
for a bachelor party because I introduced the groom and bride. And so I was in the midst of breaking up with my wife, and I go to this magical, crazy, insane, upside down place called Las Vegas, with friends who show me how these bottle service stuff works, and I get into detail the world that I discover there. And then I had tried MDMA with my wife like 5 years prior, and
Hmm.
it messed me up. I'm like, okay, that was kind of fun, and I was anti-drug for most of my life. I'm like, okay, that's kind of fun. I don't really want to do that, and I was anti-alcohol for most of my life. And then I went from nursing a drink in Vegas to just wondering how many pills we have left for the night, and then the first night and the second night and the third night, and then missing 2 flights back. And
Wow.
it was ridiculous. And because with ecstasy, life is perfect. You love who you're
Hmm.
with because it doesn't matter who you're with.
Hmm.
Right? Because it's that manufactured happiness. And I think, like, it's funny because they're doing MAPS is doing psychedelic research. MDMA is related, and they're doing MDMA psychotherapy. They're in their third phase of trials now, which is amazing. And there's actually a great documentary, Trip of Compassion, which shows people going into these therapies and taking MDMA and reprocessing it. And I think that was very much part of my journey. I just got
There were no
uh,
therapeutic
no,
interventions involved in
no.
your journey.
But yeah, and I went from like once every few weeks to every 4 days a week. I was high for sure, and
Wow.
so I was either high or recovering from being high.
And you were still running a business, a successful business.
Yeah, we were still
Jeez.
like growing a business, raising $100 million, just like going from like me, my two partners, my two co-founders, in my basement, to now the company has 600 people,
Wow.
and definitely like impacted that. I grew
Yeah.
incredibly ineffective. I went from speaking to graduating classes at colleges here to not being able to run my own meetings with 5 people.
Yeah.
I had no idea. I lost all my confidence. Had no idea what was up. which was good because my serotonin was so unregulated. So I didn't know what was happy, what was sad,
Ah.
if it, like I didn't understand things. So, and I'm already in the middle of figuring out whether I belong
Mm.
there, right? Like going from I was the only engineer to growing a team of 30 engineers,
Yeah.
and being responsible and the complication involved, which is insane. So we learned some valuable lessons on that side, but
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah. So you go from nursing a drink in Vegas to being high or coming down from a high like 4 days a week, you said.
Mhm.
So still you have this inner turmoil and you're still wanting to end your life. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and I think the partying I I felt was a part of that in a few ways. One, just destroying my body, destroying my psyche,
Okay.
and of course the not having to deal with real life if I'm
Yeah.
high, but also spending all of my money, right? Like
Ah.
if I if I if I have nothing in my savings account, and that I have another, bridge that's been burnt, and ostracizing all the people that really loved me, that saw that was, what was going on. I had more of a reason to push me over the edge, and
Mm.
luckily, my two attempts were one were thwarted by a friend,
Mhm.
and actually it's crazy event that happened in the second time. And the first one, which is like the first chapter of the book,
Mhm.
which is available for free everywhere. The first chapter is anyway. I think it was just an instinct. I somehow managed to screw it up,
Mm.
which either left me thinking that I wanted to live or that I was incompetent, and so
Right, right.
hating myself more was a part of that, I think. And I think that's the same with addiction, right? You start using and you start hating yourself because you're using and
So you
not
use some
dealing with the underlying. Yeah, exactly. You use more to deal with that hatred and not addressing the underlying problem. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, and so suicidal thoughts in and of themselves brings about shame. And so I can imagine that you weren't telling your besties, this is what's going on with me or this is how I'm feeling.
No one knew. No one knew. I
Yeah.
mean, and and especially like think of it as social media. We only post our best selves, right?
Ah.
So people are saying, "Look, Rob's in Vegas again. Woo!" Okay, he's at this party. He's all surrounded by all these quote unquote friends. You know,
Yeah.
who he's paying for.
Who he's paying for.
So, like, yeah, so it definitely looks from the outside looking in that living my best life, and
Yeah.
far from it. So I had a few people close to me, like my girlfriend at the time, now wife, who I drugged down with me, just really begged me to stop,
Mhm.
and like we have to stop. And I described those moments. She, can we just be boring? Can we just chill out? And I just want to be boring, and that's what we did.
Can you walk us through, Rob, the moment in which you said, you know what, I really don't want to die. I want to live, and how, yeah, what was that like for you?
So, I mean, there's definitely a lot of steps.
Yeah.
I think subconsciously, I sought therapy. I found someone, and I interviewed a bunch of therapists.
Hmm.
And because I think that it has to be such a good fit. So
Yes.
I interviewed people because I wanted like I was going to go in properly. If I want to go do this, I'm going to be
Hmm.
as fucking raw and honest as possible and see what this person can do for me.
Yeah.
So, and I went in and I just was full of shit. And if any therapist could not see through that, I wouldn't go back.
Oh.
And it wasn't to, and yeah, like I convinced one person that I had a romantic love of horses, and someone else, I described this blue dress monster, and the therapist was actually wearing a blue dress and she didn't get it. And it was just like, okay, well, if you're not gonna get it, I think I was just arrogant. I think I wanted someone to be more intelligent than I was, because I needed to be the one. I needed to be the one to be fixed. And then I found Anne, my therapist, who, I think she's like a double PhD, and like within 15 minutes, she's like, I was like, how full of shit are you? If you're going to,
she said that.
This, yeah, sure.
Oh, wow.
She definitely said that. Well, I think she said, if you're going to bullshit, I just want to let you know that I cost a lot, and it'll be really, it might be a waste of money for you. And I was like, okay. And I cried in that like first like session, and I'm like, oh, I guess I have to keep her.
Rob, how did you find her? Was it like a referral?
No, just the internet okay. Session. Here's the funniest thing. Like, she literally, she lived in the building I lived in, which only had 55 units. And her office was across the street. And I'd seen these 5 other people from across the city, and I'd have to figure out traffic. So I'd lived, downtown, and I had to like, whatever. And then I discover her, I found a paper she wrote, and I was like, oh, wow, this is actually incredibly intelligent, because I can't get it. And I have no idea what she's saying right here. All right, it's just, so literally. And then when I told her that, she's like, by the way, if I see you over there, I have to tell you that I'm just going to say hi as a neighbor, just because the patient doctor confidentiality stuff. I'm like, okay. And then, I just literally just found her online, and she did things that, like, she made it okay. She's like, if you need to take ecstasy, that's fine. Do your thing, you do you. But right before you do, can you please write down why? Yeah. Are you having catastrophic thoughts? And just list down. And, to her credit, that's brilliant. How many, you don't want to rebel if you're allowed to rebel. It's not rebelling. Like, what do you mean I'm allowed? And I wouldn't say it prevented me every time, but it did prevent me a few times. And I think that was a part of her genius, her plan. Mm-hmm. But also now I'm looking at myself all of a sudden.
Yeah.
Doing she was the one who got me to do the inner child work. Mm-hmm. So, which I had no idea, and you probably asked if I believed in it, mm-hmm. In my 30s, I would have said that's ridiculous. But writing with my right hand to that little boy, and then responding, writing with my left hand from his perspective. Holy shit. Holy heartbreaking, holy like revelatory. I still do it, by the way. I still do it when I have trouble. I do. Yeah. Because with the book being out, is triggering, and Anne has since retired, and I did find someone new that I happened upon, which was great, and she's turned me on to a men's group, which is great. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to do, partly of that was because the book was coming out, and no one knew. My mom didn't know.
Wow.
My father only found out maybe a few weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So because and through the book, right? So, and that being out, if we step back to, like, I wrote the goodbye, and then I decided to finish, my series of kind of like just my own chronology. And I didn't finish a book or anything. I just sort of finished this long piece of work, because writing was my therapy. Mm-hmm. Because I could be vulnerable without being vulnerable in writing, because I didn't have to show it to anyone. And then when I showed it to my girlfriend, she's just, you should probably share this, because this is going to help a lot of people. And so she encouraged me to finish it as a finished book, and which is ironic, because she's a very private person.
Yeah.
But she's very much a part of this book. She's the hero, really. So I'm writing about my deepest, darkest secrets, and she's kind of there.
Yeah.
She's very much there, and her becoming, going from each other's cheerleader or enablers to each
Enablers.
other's cheerleaders, right? We were definitely each other's enablers, especially
Mhm.
Thursday nights.
Mhm.
Like, oh, Thursday, it's a whole new weekend, because on, Tuesday morning, we said we're never going to do this again. But Thursday night, there's always a reason to go out. And yeah, turning that completely around and being each other's cheerleaders and yeah, just in each other's corner.
Rob, what do you think? I'm curious about you finding a therapist because that takes a lot of courage. And at that point, you weren't sure you wanted to live.
Yeah. And so, like I said, I think that was subconscious. I was just in pain
Yeah.
all the time.
Yeah.
And the drugs helps. And I think I definitely wanted to live on some level,
Some level.
but I didn't acknowledge it. I was still completely even talking to Anne, I was still in the back of my mind. I'm like, well, I can probably fall back on killing myself, and it's probably a good idea anyway, because I don't think anybody can fix this.
Mm.
So I just decided to try it. And I mean, part of it, my ex-wife still cared deeply about me, even though I treated her so badly.
Yeah.
She really pushed me. Like she'd come over because she knew.
Oh, wow.
She came over and we'd hang out, and then she'd leave, and she'd go to one of my best friends. We're living in the same building. She went down and said, "I'm really worried about Rob. Can you keep an eye on him?" And he didn't like her, and he's like, "Yeah, Rob's fine. Rob's fine. Don't worry about it," because he didn't know. And so I had that fallback,
Wow.
and again, it was a lot of steps back, but there was momentum going forward that I wanted to be around, and there was a conscious revelation where I just said, you know what, I want to live, and I got to stop. I got to figure out how to live, and kind of flick the switch where I want to live, and this is how I do it. And I slipped a lot, and I forgave myself, and I studied different things. I really got into Tim Ferriss, with that whole quantified self, measure it and prove it type thing, which is topical right now because Tim Ferriss's podcast yesterday, he announced that he was sexually abused, and it was incredibly triggering and difficult to hear. That's weird. So I actually set up another appointment with my therapist, after yesterday, because it is triggering and
It
you need to
is.
figure that out. So yeah, I did want to live at some point and started to move forward that way, and, I didn't have any 12 steps, but I think I checked off most of the boxes.
Okay.
I think the whole spirituality is a nebulous thing, and it's deeply personal. So, I fell in love with Buddhist doctrine, just the philosophy, the foundation part, not really any of the magic. And what Buddha said essentially, which is, just had a great framework for living, a good life. That's it. That's nothing to do with the other, what it's become, with all these branches. So yeah, and I had a sponsor in my wife.
Sponsor in your wife.
We were each other's sponsor, which was great. And yeah, I lost 70 pounds just learning nutrition, and executing it properly. And then, and we got married. We got married in Vegas. We eloped.
Was that on purpose?
I mean, it's funny because I asked my girlfriend, to marry me. We weren't together at the time. We had broken up because I was decided to end my life. But then while we were broken up, but we were together, I just said, I don't want to end my life. And I said, you know what? I think we should just get married. And she said, okay, but you have to sell this penthouse downtown. No more party. We're going to go move to the suburbs. We're going to quiet down. We're going to live a boring life.
Yeah.
And I said, okay. And our last hurrah was Vegas. We actually, got married 2 weeks later. We took our parents and our siblings and got married at the littlest church of the West. where her parents got married 40 years prior.
Oh, funny.
So, and then we did it all, and then we slipped, of course, as we do. But
Mhm.
as soon as she was pregnant, it was zero tolerance,
Yeah.
and so we haven't looked back. And now we have two little girls.
Yay. Yeah, that's quite the story. I encourage everyone to get the book. But before we sort of wrap up today, Rob, I'm wondering if maybe we could talk just about finding hope, because I think that when you have these suicidal thoughts, you feel like the only way to make the suffering and the pain go away is to end your life. But there's always a part of you, you have to find it, but there's always going to be a part of you that wants to live. And you mentioned the internal family systems parts work a couple of times in this podcast. I'm wondering if you could talk just a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm deeply logical, and whether you attribute it to Persian fables, this too shall pass, or Buddhist doctrine, we can always rely on things changing. So at the darkest moments, you can hold on to that. You can say, you know what, things are not always going to be this way. And so things will change. And I mean, there's the flip side to that coin. Things will always not be as blissful, which encourages you to savor those moments as well. I think that was an underlying belief of mine. I'm like, it can't possibly be like this all the time. Even though I was in pain, and I never wanted to say that. I never wanted to complain or whine and be like, oh, I'm just not in pain all the time. Like, it's not something that I respect. I don't like to be a complainer.
Yeah, men don't cry.
Oh man! So my one of my next projects I'm working on now is about masculinity, and it's boys don't cry, and we know that dogma leads to men. I mean, those emotions coming out in different ways, which is usually violence and aggression. So yeah, like I'm a big crier, you know. As I have two little girls, I'm like, I am going to be 100% human me with them. So and being vulnerable. I mean, another thing about releasing all of my details is that I no longer have masks. Right. So everything is out. Cards are on the table. You see who I am. And so as long as I'm vulnerable and honest, then how people react to it is on them. So, yeah, I mean, going back to that hope, I mean, things will get better. It's just how things work. Things always change. And you can inch it to where you want to go, right? I think small habits make big differences. And just learning how. I was not a proponent of therapy, but now I'm a huge proponent of therapy. And I realize that you're a counselor, right? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, having someone to talk to and ask questions and to frame things that you wouldn't have reframed can really, really, really help. And now, to give more hope, there's so much available. Right? There's EMDR, there's sound therapy, there's neurofeedback training. There's so much research in psychedelic research, right? With mushrooms and MDMA, or psilocybin and MDMA and LSD, and not suggesting to do that illegally.
Please do not.
Please do not. Yeah, I mean, the message is that there are so many ways to get better now.
Yeah.
And there are so many people willing to help. I'm one of them. I answer every email through my website. So, I love it was difficult for a while, but because it is triggering, but if I can help, then, this whole journey is worthwhile and fulfilling.
That is probably a great place to end. So, Rob, how can people get a hold of you? And more importantly, how can they find this book? Because I feel like you had mentioned in one of our previous talks that some of the proceeds go to the men's group that you're in.
Right. Yeah. It took me 8 months to get into my men's group because of lack of funding. So directing proceeds to go to them. my book is available in all versions. So there's an audiobook, which is pretty funny because it's done by a voice actor. And just to let you know, like, there is a little bit of dark humor in my book. I wrote it kind of as dark humor, and the voice actor is who asked that. I'm like, yeah, I'm going to hire that guy because he gets it. So it is an audiobook. It's in Kindle. It's in hardcover and paperback, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, wherever you get books, especially now online. If you want to go to beforeIleaveyou.com, I bought that because people can't spell my name. I'm also selling signed copies because I have all these promos because with COVID, I can't do book signings. And the proceeds of that are all going to the men's group, it's the treatment center for childhood trauma here in Ottawa, in my city as well. And then I will be directing some things to MAPS in the future, which is the research for psychedelic research. Yeah. BeforeIleaveyou.com, and it has all my socials on there. Instagram is Rob Imbo. I'm on Facebook. I don't have Instagram. It gives me anxiety. So, so I am quite regular on Twitter. It's not on my phone or anything, but I do get on there every day and stuff. And I answer all emails through my website.
That sounds amazing. And I'm sure that a lot of people will be reaching out. So thank you. Thank you for that. Yeah. Well, Rob, it's been a pleasure. And I hope we get to do this again when your next book comes out.
Yeah, that would be wonderful. Thanks so much for having me on your show. And thank you for your show. I think it's really important.
Well, thank you, Rob. Have a good one.
Thanks, you too.
One more thing, guys, before you go. If you are struggling with thoughts of suicide, know that you are not alone. Make sure that you tell someone that you care about, someone that you trust. And if you're struggling with telling someone, please do call the National Suicide number at 1-800-273-8255. There are trained individuals there that are willing to listen. Again, that number is 1-800-273-8255. Again, you are not alone. Thank you for listening to the Atheists in Recovery podcast. For more great info and to stay up to date, head over to atheistsandrecovery.com.